everybody. Welcome to Naturalistics, a podcast designed to help you become a better naturalist. My name is Stefan.
My name's Matt. What's up?
This month on Naturalistics, we're tackling the topic of the drive-by naturalist.
Yeah, it's a fun topic. We've been this is our episode 3, right?
Episode 3.
And, we're a couple months into this. We haven't really sent it out into the broad world yet. Maybe you're listening to this in the future when it's like we're really famous or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But, at this point, we've really only sent it to people we know and feel comfortable with their feedback. But
Maybe. I mean, it's true.
But we've gotten some really awesome positive feedback on the cast, and really excited to continue getting better at this stuff. And we've been thinking about possibly doing some outings as it's towards springtime here in southern Maine, and there's a possibility of us joining up with some other naturalists and getting out there and maybe doing some birding. So we have tentatively scheduled April 2nd for some kind of outing in southern Maine, possibly some birding. If you're interested in that, hit us up at naturalisticspod@gmail.com. So that's naturalisticspod@gmail.com. You can email us and let us know that you're interested. And April 2nd, probably like mid-morning, midday, something like that. So, hit us up. Let us know if that's something you're interested in. And we're just going to keep growing this thing. All right. So with that, let's jump in.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with our segment on some story times.
Yeah, you got a good story for us this month, Matt?
Yeah, definitely. And if you're interested in sending us something in the future for this, feel free to hit us up on our email again and let us know some kind of naturalist story, snippet, anything. Send it our way, and we can digest it on the pod at some point if you're interested in that.
Each month we're gonna be breaking down and digesting, as it were, some sort of little natural history mystery, and so it would be great for us if some of them were not our own. So yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and this podcast is all about process, and so we love to sort of break things down. So anything, that we can get our sink our teeth into is super fun for us, and hopefully helps everybody else out in our geeking out process here. So that's what we love to do, and so we love sharing it. So send it our way. All right,
Matt, what do you got?
All right, so this is a fun one. Especially following up on our tracking episode from last month. I don't think it occurred too long after our recording, but it was a great snowy tracking day. Lots of fluffy sort of powder snow with really clear tracking conditions. In other words, like prints were just really distinct, and any kind of animal tracks that were left, the toes and claws and all the morphology, as it's called, of the foot was really clear. So it's just really impressive tracking conditions. Anyway, I was walking down a trail, and actually it happened that day there were all these fisher tracks out there. And fishers, for those who don't know, sometimes they're called fisher cats, although I don't know, I'm not really into that name. I don't know about you, Stefan.
I think in the case of fisher cat, when you're talking about common names, it's hard to really say that one common name is more valid than another common name. I think if you want to be a purist, you're going to stick with the Latin. So whatever you call it, as long as you're consistent, I think that's what's important.
We like Puritans on the cast.
Purists, not Puritans.
Oh, I thought you said Puritans.
Did I say Puritans?
No, you didn't.
Purists.
Okay, so anyway, lots of fishers out there, not to be confused with cats. And
sure, it's in the weasel family. It's a mustelid. So cat is
yeah.
Although that is a common name, it is a misnomer.
Yeah, and I don't really like it for that reason.
So it's misleading.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much mythology around the fisher cat.
There really is, but
it's kind of ridiculous.
Let's not get into that right now.
Yeah, so there was all these Fisher tracks out in the woods, like, and these are woods that I spend a lot of time in. I'm telling you, probably at least 20 hours a week out there, or around that time. And I don't see Fisher all that often there. And this particular day, they were just everywhere, and it looked like multiple Fishers. Like, and I traveled far and wide that day, and they were just literally everywhere. Like, it was hard to go 100 feet without seeing a Fisher track. But anyway, I was walking down the trail, and really fresh powder came down, and I came across this Fisher trail. I followed it up to this tree. It was a big old hemlock tree, this big evergreen, on top of like a little tiny knoll, like a little like small little hill. And it was cool because it looked like the Fisher had walked around the tree. They usually lope. It's kind of like sort of jumping or like moving like all four at once, but then it started walking around this tree. So it was like sort of, moving like a cat or a dog would, sort of like slowly around this tree. And I interpret that based on the tracks. And it's moving around the tree, and then I followed those around, and then there was this hole inside of the tree. No, or sort it wasn't not in the side of the tree, it was in the ground, sort of in the root mass underneath the tree. And as I looked closer at the hole, there was a little bit of blood right in the hole, and that's when I was like, oh, ooh, something cool is happening here. And so I get on all fours, I look down in the hole, and there's dirt and stuff in there too, like that's been scuffed out of there. And I was like, oh, I wonder if this Fisher like grabbed something out of this hole. And I even smelled the hole. I didn't really smell anything. And then I stood up and I look at the trail, and the trail's going off away from the tree. No, sorry, the trail was coming towards the tree. And so I'm like, oh, I wonder if it stashed something in this hole. Like, it killed something somewhere else and then brought it and put it in this hole. And then I go over to that trail, and then I noticed distinct drag marks. As in, like, there's a Fisher trail, but next to the Fisher trail, there's, like, a line, sort of like as if something's been dragged through the snow. Like, sort of nothing else can make that besides something being dragged. And it was just such a cool trail, and of course, I had to follow that trail. So I followed it out, and, about 100 yards away, maybe 200 yards away, and it, like, weaved a little bit through the woods, but, it was pretty direct. Followed it to sort of where it went from a straight, or a, mostly straight line into, like, an arcing circle with some blood spattered all around, which I concluded to be like the kill site, where something that's where whatever had made the blood and was being dragged had been killed. And I, looked around that area, and I couldn't find anything else, any other sign of what had killed it. And I just thought, this is so cool. Like, a Fisher killed something and then dragged it like a couple hundred yards and then stuffed it in a hole. And of course, in my head, I'm thinking, it's a squirrel. I didn't see any feathers, or like, I just saw blood. The size of the drag line was about squirrel size, and it was a squirrel hole that it had stuffed it in, which I thought was rather morbid. But very appropriate for a Fisher.
Yeah, characteristic.
Yes. Yes. Humorous. So it stuffed that squirrel into the hole, and then I walked away, and I went looking for this other person who was out on the land, my friend Deneen. She's a great tracker, and I was just really excited to show her this trail. And so when I showed Deneen the trail, I started with the kill site, because that was actually closer to the direction she was in. And I didn't explain anything to her. I just wanted her to come to this trail totally fresh.
Yeah.
And so I brought her to the trail, and immediately when she saw it, her eyes lit up, and we started following it back towards the tree in the hole. And so
let me get this straight, Matt. So initially you backtracked this Fisher.
Right, it's backtracking, yep.
And then with Deneen, so for you the second time around, for her the first time, you were 4-tracking from the kill site, 4-tracking towards
that hemlock tree in the hole. Yes.
Towards the hemlock tree. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so along that trail, that second time, I started to notice something else, which was these two little imprints of tracks, like just the tips of your finger size right next to each other, in line with that trail. And to me, those looked like long-tailed weasel tracks. And they were right alongside the whole drag. And then I also noticed, and Deneen noticed, and pointed out to me, that occasionally the Fisher Trail would veer away from the drag line. Like, just slightly, like, really slightly. I'm talking like 5 inches, which isn't very much. It's just hard to pick that up sometimes when you're trailing an animal. Mm-hmm. And so we go up to the tree, and I'm looking around, and I'm seeing these long-tailed weasel sign that is just right in the trail the whole time, consistent. Whereas the Fisher Trail had deviated. And come up to the hole, and Deneen starts asking me questions about the trail, and she starts saying, and I'm telling her questions that are, I'm giving her answers that are based on my assumptions, which were all based on the Fisher being the main culprit of this thing, of this whole equation. And basic moral of the story, or like the end of the story, was that I kind of, like, with Deneen's help, pieced this whole thing out as the long-tailed weasel had killed something and dragged it and was in the hole. And it turns out that it's probably still in that hole because its trail did not leave that whole area, which I thought was really cool.
Okay, and so the long-tail trail dead ends.
Dead ends, yeah.
At the hole, whereas the Fisher Trail carries on past the hole?
Yes.
Okay.
And going back to the kill site, there was a tree right there with a nice flying squirrel hole in it. And so I think it was either a flying squirrel or a gray squirrel, but the size of the drag mark was probably a little small for a gray squirrel. And there was bark and moss all under that tree that had been scraped off, so it looked like the Fisher, or the long-tailed weasel, had gone up the tree into the hole, pulled out a flying squirrel, killed it, dragged it over to that hole, stuffed it in there, was still in there with the flying squirrel, maybe eating it. And other people, Deneen included, said they could smell a dead animal smell in that hole. I guess I couldn't smell it. Mm. And what happened was the Fisher came out and smelled the kill, came up, and then followed the trail exactly, probably based on scent, or almost exactly, and then tried to dig it out of that hole. And that was why initially I saw the
dirt,
the digging.
Yeah.
And then, the Fisher tracks were covering most of that area that I initially came to. This is key. When I first came into the area, the Fisher was the first thing I saw, and, was the most distinct part of that whole beginning part of the tracks that I saw. So it really wrote the story for me. It really,
right.
That was really the primer for the whole thing for me. So yeah, that's kind of the whole story of my experience. It's just always cool to see kill sites, and of course having two weasels interacting, or seeing their tracks and trails just interacting
part of the
in
same
that way.
Story.
Super fun, and then knowing that weasel was in there was really cool too. So
yeah, it's a great example of a couple of important points that we did touch on last month. Don't track alone. That was one of the things
for
that
sure.
I think we talked about, and prime reason in support of that is that when you had a second set of eyes on it, and it kind of helped you look at it again, look at it from another perspective, and you were able to gather more information, which actually totally turned your original story on its head, right?
For sure. I mean, you can't get it any more clear than that, where I came from one direction and she came from the other direction, and then we put the two pieces of the two perspectives together, mm-hmm. and created a way clearer picture of the whole thing. If I had just walked away, I would have never gotten that whole second part of the story.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't have.
And it's still, your initial and false I think it
Yeah.
seems like you concluded your initial
Pretty clear, yeah.
false read on it. That's a cool story, but isn't it so much cooler?
Definitely.
Once you got the full scoop.
Yeah, no, it was super fun and it was cool. I appreciate, people like Deneen, like you, like Naturalist that will challenge me and not just like assume that I know or like that I know the whole picture or like, I that's something I really value in people that I work with and people that I track with or whatever.
Yeah, you don't want to you never want to take that for granted with anyone, even your most highly regarded naturalist friends. They're not necessarily always right. They don't. Yeah. They miss things just like everyone else. And the same thing goes for folks writing field guides.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a part of me, like, I remember in that moment when Deneen was, like, really, like, questioning me about my story that I was making, like, that I was telling her. And I was, like, definitely clinging to it a little bit. And, like, being, like, sort of, I felt like I was defending the fisher being the main part of it. And that the weasel was actually, like, following the fisher. But it was pretty clear at the end of the day that it was, having seen the fisher trail deviate a little bit in particular was the main piece of evidence for that. Mm-hmm. But I felt myself even gravitating towards my own story that I had made.
In spite of the evidence.
Which is fascinating to me because I really try and work on that a lot.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to break that habit of like clinging to the story that you want to be true, which is maybe the story that you've made up or that you've interpreted.
Yeah.
So it's hard to hear sometimes what other people think. But, a little sometime later, even just then, it was just so awesome. It's just so fun to be challenged in that way. Like, I learned so much, and if everything was just like what I saw was true, or
boring, right?
I don't know. It's just not really that interesting.
Yeah.
So I like to reflect on that a little bit. Yeah. So definitely the don't track alone came into that.
Don't jump to conclusions.
Don't jump to conclusions, like the preconceived notions that I had. Not preconceived notions, but I don't know. Yeah. I think I jumped to conclusions though there.
It's hard not to even in your mind. It's hard to keep your mind from exploring possibilities. And I don't think you necessarily need to, but you just need to watch yourself do that.
I totally agree with that. It's really just it would be impossible to look at that hole when I first come up to it and not think, oh, maybe there's like a fisher stashed something in here, or maybe pulled something out of here.
Yeah.
Like, it's so hard to be like purely objective.
Your mind is naturally, as a curious person, your mind is going to start exploring possible stories.
But the thing is, I do think, especially when you track with other people, it's just so good to like be open to the other possibilities and to really listen to what they see, and then really incorporate that into what you see to formulate what you think happened in this case. Or
even if there are probably many situations where hearing what other people see might just further support your idea.
Sure, yeah.
But it's still good to hear that.
Yeah. And there's probably going to be situations where you're going to listen to what someone else says, and then you're going to think about it, and you're going to disagree with them still. Mm-hmm. And that's okay too. I just think that stuff's really interesting and a fun part of being a naturalist is that kind of dynamic and the getting other people's perspectives. Just at the end of the day, that's what it is. Like,
yeah. And that gets back to the Triforce. I mean, the sharing
element
of it
element,
is totally part of it. You have your curiosity. Other folks have their curiosity. You're both going to make your own observations. Yeah. But the sharing is really what ties everything together at the end.
Definitely. Yeah, and this story, it has a lot of process elements too of it that we just talked about, but also like I'm walking away with some really cool questions about weasel behavior and stuff where like, and I also was just putting myself into the mind and like experience of a weasel or like a small predator on the landscape and what it must feel like to get prey and how it probably just beelined it right for that hole. Like, it really was a short. It was like it knew right where it was going, and and it knew why. Because if it didn't get into that hole, like did it get its prey into that hole, it was going to be gone.
Sure, the opportunistic fisher. It could be right around the corner.
It's just got to get it right in there, and I just think that thinking about that animal's experience is really fascinating to me, and just like how it's just working so hard to get that food, like that massive resource of that whatever flying squirrel or whatever it might have been, and the fisher is just prowling like the landscape. I mean, it's just covering massive areas. If you've ever tracked a fisher, they're just covering so much ground, and that's so much of their experience is just like being opportunistic and like seeing things and taking advantage of those kind of situations. Yeah, and there's just so much there. Yeah, there's so much there for it's a ripe story for like a window into the weasel's world a little bit. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
All right, and so now it's time for the topic of the podcast. This month we're talking about the drive-by naturalist. What we mean by drive-by naturalist is when you're in the car, you're driving, maybe you're on your daily commute or some trip that you make. Maybe you do a regular trip to the grocery store once a week or something like that, and you have some time where you're busy driving, but maybe your mind is wandering a little bit. Maybe you listen to the radio, listen to the news, or something like that. But what we think you also might like to do is spend some time making good observations, and we feel like there's no reason why you can't make valuable observations while you're in the car, whether you're as the driver or as the passenger. So yeah, we're coming from a place of knowing that as a naturalist, there's really never enough time. People are busy, and I know Matt and I are busy, and we do get to spend a lot of time with this, this sort of stuff. But even so, it's important to us to find ways of leveraging every bit of time to make your experience as a naturalist richer. And so one way in which we think that there might be some untapped potential for folks out there is during this daily commute or whatever it is for you. And so hence the topic, the drive-by naturalist. And real quick, Matt, I know this is important. We want to touch on the safety aspect.
Yeah, I mean, so we had to consult our legal team on this. We did have some potential of creating some safety hazards and being liable for people like crashing cars and multiple accidents, and it all being due to identifying some random duck or something like that. And we just really wanted to be paying attention to that kind of those kind of things. And so we've enlisted our legal team, and they're really on board. And
our legal team was adamant. They were adamant. They're totally supportive. They like the idea of this episode, but they were adamant that we do a little disclaimer.
Yeah.
And it really, we can sum it up by saying just don't crash.
So don't crash, please. Take care of yourself. Be safe. Number one rule. If
you do crash, telling the people involved that it was because you were looking at what you thought might be a rare duck is not a good idea.
Just don't mention our name.
All right, so the drive-by naturalist, like Matt, how can we naturalize while we're driving?
Yeah, so naturalizing while driving. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually, as a naturalist. I feel like it's one of those things that really, like, enriches my life. Part of being a naturalist is just like those. It's like the little things. It's not like I'm going to go for a hike now and identify some birds. It's like the little, like. Yeah. It's like I feel like I'm a opportunistic naturalist more than anything.
Yeah, you're like the fisher.
I'm like the fisher.
You were like the fisher. Yeah.
And I really don't. Yeah, honestly, I don't do a lot of active birding and tracking right now in my life. But I'm opportunistic, and whenever there's tracks, whenever there's birds, whenever there's whatever, I'm going to be paying attention, and I'm going to be like observing, and I'm going to be down in that observation realm. And you can be sure that there's going to be some stories. A lot of my stories come from driving, honestly. Like, I have a ton of hilarious and weird driving stories from being a naturalist. And I always joke, and this is going back a little bit, but the way I'm gonna die is some animal, like epic, like elk, like mountain lion is gonna like run in front of my car, and then I'm gonna freak out and like stare at this animal until I crash into a tree and die. And that'll be the way I go.
That will be the way Matt goes. So elk lion. If you ever
Um,
hear of a guy who goes because he was distracted by an elk lion,
that'll be me.
That'll be
and
Matt.
I don't think that'll be so bad, but don't let it be you though, please. So anyway, on to the topic. So, naturalizing while driving. So what we want is just for you to be able to, we basically realize that nobody has all the time in the world to be a professional naturalist, and they can't spend all their time doing this stuff, but you can gain a lot from, you can leverage your time and really get value out of your driving. I think a lot of us have an impulse to get in the car, turn the key, and turn on the radio. And kind of like tune out. Like instantly, like it's kind of like zone out time.
yeah,
And I guess I would encourage people to like think about that as like, okay, when am I just like zoning out and like checking out a little bit? Because being a naturalist is kind of like a call. It's like a call to check in a little bit to what's going on.
yeah.
So I just encourage people to consider driving as an opportunity to actually like check in on what's going on.
Yeah, don't just write it off as a sort of a chore.
Yeah,
The drive might be a chore, but you can tap into the potential that Matt's talking
exactly.
about.
Who needs to listen
make it worthwhile.
to politics? Who needs to listen to crappy radio music or baseball scores or any of that crap? So maybe just turn it off and tune into what's going on. And you can actually tune in while you're listening. But
Sure.
listening can be a part of driving too, as we'll get into. But
Yeah, and like Matt's saying, a lot of I think, Matt, that there's a key element here, which is that the naturalizing while driving is a way of getting your foot in the door to a lot of potential natural history lines of inquiry and discovery.
for sure.
It's sort of like I think maybe the best example I can think of, although there are many, is the animal trail that crosses the road.
Right.
You see the trail. Maybe you have time to stop and look at it, and follow it right then, or maybe you can come back later on. But the bit of the trail where it crosses the road is just your foot in the door into a journey of discovery into that animal's life. At least it's the potential for that.
Right.
And it's the same thing for a lot of other things. Discovering new tree species that are previously unknown to you. You see something that looks a bit different. It's odd. You slow down or stop and look at it, and you ask questions, and it kicks the Triforce in, right?
Yeah, definitely. If you're tuned in to that, yeah.
Right. So that's the potential that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And like you were saying earlier, a lot of your stories come from
Oh yeah, definitely.
your driving, things you have observed while driving, or things that you've sort of been hooked into because of something you noticed while driving.
It's kind of like one of these, like, it's easy to know you're naturalizing when you're like, and you got your backpack on, and you got your bins, your binos, like, ready to go, and you're like, you know, you're out, it's the morning, the birds are singing, you're outside, you're on foot, you're in the woods. I mean, it's, like, really easy to be like, I'm naturalizing right now.
Yeah.
But the thing
You've got the regalia.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, driving is an exceptional way to naturalize because, I mean, a few things that come to mind are just the massive amount of landscape knowledge that you can gain from driving. I mean, there's no other experience, maybe a plane or something like that. But, like, the way that you can just move quickly over the landscape and get a really, like, big picture view of what's going on. You know, let's just say we're talking about driving around your own area, your own town, like going, you know, commutes, going to the grocery store, all that kind of stuff. Like, you can just start to learn so much about the topography, like how you know, where the hills are, you know, you can pick up on where the wind's moving by just, you know, how the micro winds are moving, like when you move down into, like, wetlands and stuff like that, where the frosts are, where the warm spots are, where the snow's melted, where the snow's staying, where the birds are going, if you're rolling the windows down, where the birds are first arriving and singing, where the peepers are first coming, I literally could just go on and on and on about all the different elements of phenology, which is like the timing of seasons and in species and stuff like that, or geology and all these different aspects that you're gaining, like, a bird's eye view, big picture, just by getting in the car and driving around and paying attention. I mean, just you're leveraging insane value as a naturalist if you are accessing that time in your car.
Furthermore, edge habitat is some of the most fertile ground for different things interacting. Plants and animals, animals and other animals, plants and plants, and a road essentially, from a naturalist perspective, is a huge long strip, or it's really two long strips, one on either side, of edge habitat.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah, there's usually a lot of wildlife associated with roads. You know, with that edge, there's a lot of sunlight coming in, and then, you know, a lot of food availability in those areas. One of the really cool things about naturalizing while driving that I've learned is I start to notice corridors really clearly. You know, especially, you know, in areas that I travel a lot, like my commute in particular. Like, you know, I go out in the morning and I come back at night, and, like, there's certain areas where I always see the deer crossing in that particular area every time I come home at night. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Everybody has those experiences. But when you really log those into your memory, then you can start to think, okay, why are the deer crossing in that spot? Are they always going in the same direction? Is it always the same deer? Or is it always at the same time of year? Like, these are really cool questions, and maybe you want to get out of your car and start to think about other, you know, pieces of information and data that you can collect, observations you can make to answer those questions. Yeah, so corridors are just really cool aspect of driving. That it's hard to imagine another way that you would get that information, right? Like, you're not going to get it just by walking around, unless you're like an insane tracker or something like that.
An insane tracker, just that image of an insane tracker.
I'm an insane tracker.
Like a tracker who's out of their mind.
I think I know some of those people.
Sure, they're out there.
Yeah, you know who you are. Yeah, so...
And again, I feel like, Matt, that the corridor piece is, again, it's the foot in the door. It's like, while you're driving, you can key into these corridors, and then, like you're saying, you can follow it up if you want to. It's like it gets you a little taste. It wets your whistle, so to speak.
Definitely.
And then there's so much more there. It's like the first chapter,
right,
that leads you through this, like, epic novel.
Definitely.
of
I mean,
of naturalist inquiry.
it's been really useful for me in seeing where different animals are moving. In particular, deer really come to mind for me as like a really putting the pieces together, the pieces of the puzzle of like how like deer movement works, and like when they're moving from their night areas into their day areas, or vice versa, and just realizing the timing of those things, and roads in particular, for whatever reason, they just make it really clear, how those things are happening or where they're going. So yeah, those are just a few things. I mean, a few things that you can gain from really tuning in while you're driving. A few more that I've written down here are hawk migrations, or like geese, like Canada geese, or like cormorants, or something like that, where there's like large flocks, or hawks. Really though, like I really feel like the roads, like driving and paying attention to hawks in the spring and in the fall and all that kind of, like, they really clues me into like when the major movements are happening, because I'm really not getting up on top of hills and watching for those birds like every day, but I do drive pretty much every day.
Yeah, and
that's really gaining me a big perspective on those movements of those animals. And of course, here in southern Maine, I'm really tuning into, in the fall when the wind's coming from the northeast, moving southwest. Like, I'm really tuning into that then. But on a day when the wind's blowing from that direction, and I'm going out driving, I'm just going to work, going to the office, going to do my thing, I'm really tuned in to, where are the broadwings? Like, where are the red tails? Like, will I see a few ospreys today? Like, I don't usually see them, but maybe they're moving through. So that can be really cool, really enriching. The other one is blooms, and this can be cool just because, when you're driving, sometimes you go and you're out and you just see these, large blooms of, I don't know, it could be something like something nasty like purple loosestrife, or it could be goldenrod, or
red maple.
Red maple's a good one, or even in the fall, the foliage, different tree species.
What's turning in August? Like what do you see first?
And so you see these blooms or the leaves changing, and you can see these on these landscape levels. And what's cool is you get these landscape level pictures of these changes, and then, being that you're driving and going through all these different microclimates, you can start to see how that kind of stuff, like the microclimates, are affecting those blooms differently. So it might be you're going up in elevation, and that's changing. The blooms are coming later, or the leaves are falling earlier, or in the swamps the red maples are turning earlier, or things like that. Yeah. And those are things that you really, I think, I've learned from driving, from really paying attention while driving more than anything else.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, yeah. So, Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about how, it's one thing to just say, pay attention while you're driving, but sometimes it helps to be able to have some sort of a game or something you do, some sort of a routine thing you do that helps you key into something, whether it's the hawk migration, or whether it's plants, blooms, whatever it might be. Yeah, what are some ways that we can help ourselves make better observations while we're driving?
Yeah, so there's a few games that we had in mind. We tried to come up with a few games too for this episode, and trying to think of some original things. So we'll offer those here. But I will say that I would love to hear if anybody has any cool stuff of your own that you have, that that works well for you, that helps you, again, tune in while driving. So these are games that help you tune into what's going on in the natural world. So anyway, the first game that, it's not really a game so much, but sort of like a trigger game, is is something I've heard of before. I'm not sure exactly where I learned this, but it's sort of like it's very simple. All it means is that it sort of zaps you out of that droning, sort of zoning out driving, where when I see a red-tailed hawk, I will pay attention for a second and just pay attention to what's going on. Look around, where am I? What is the landscape look right now? And then you go back to whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can use almost anything,
it helps if you use something that is not ubiquitous. At the red-tailed hawk example, it's like you're not constantly seeing red-tailed hawks.
Right.
But you want to pick something that is frequent enough that it will happen.
Yeah, definitely.
Consistently, but infrequent enough that it will function as a trigger.
The funny thing is that sometimes people will pick something they think is infrequent, and then they'll start to notice how frequent it is.
And there's value in that. I mean, there's...
So that's just a really simple one. Another really simple... This is more of a game, and this is one that we did come up with, which is... It could probably use a better name, but this is what it's called. Notice something new.
I kind of think of it as driving memory. It's like memory.
It's like a memory game
while you're
and
driving.
Noticing also where. Yeah. So the idea is that this game's intended for a commute, somewhere where you're driving to and from frequently. So what you do is you pick, as you're driving, you pick one thing that you didn't notice before, and it has to be something that's permanent or semi-permanent. For instance, a particular distinct tree, or it could even be something like a sign. It could be a busted old car. It could be anything that's semi-permanent that maybe you didn't notice before. Maybe it's tucked away behind something. Maybe it's really camouflaged. Maybe you just didn't catch your eye before. So, but you pick that one thing, and then on your way back home, so let's say you went out in the day and you picked that in the morning. On your way back home, you're going to notice that thing that you noticed in the morning. But you're also going to pick one more thing. So now you have two things. So you have two things that you didn't notice before. And the next day, you're going to drive again, and you're going to have, in the morning, you're going to have three. And you try and this is why Stefan said it's a memory game, because you're trying to pick or remember each of those things for each time you drive. And you try and see how many you can get to before you start losing them.
Yeah, if you miss one, then you start over, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's the basic idea. And
I played this game, and it gets hard after 3 or 4. It's crazy how hard it gets, and sometimes because you really are just zoning out so much, and that's the whole point of the game. It just helps you zone out a little bit less, while also tuning you into something maybe you didn't notice before. And that's part of the rules of the game, is if you did play the game before and you can't use the same thing ever again, sort of, as part of the rule. So you always have, each new thing has to be a genuinely new thing that you haven't noticed. Mm-hmm. But that's been a good one. Yeah,
I think that's a neat thing, and that's especially good for, like you said, ways that you drive regularly. And then also, it seems like shorter trips. It's right. Hard to play if you have an hour commute or something.
Totally.
If you have a 20-minute, half an hour even commute, the memory game seems to be doable. Anything more than that starts to feel, I don't know, it's easy to sort of forget what's going on, and it just doesn't seem to work as well. Another good game for those of you who spend time driving on highways or interstates where you have mile markers is a game called Mile Marker Tree ID. This is another one that we made up, that you look at the mile markers and you choose, you begin, so if it's whatever, mile 67 or something, and this doesn't matter if you drive this stretch of highway once, or if you drive it regularly, you can play this game. But the idea is that you choose. So say it's mile 67, and you're counting up, and you try and identify positively as many species of tree as you can on that stretch of road from mile 67 to mile 68. It can be really hard. It's very fast-paced. You don't get a lot of time to look at individual trees, and it's easy to, sometimes it's easy to spot something as a maple, but it can be tricky to determine whether it's a sugar maple or a red maple at 60 miles an hour on the interstate. So it's interesting. It's do not crash playing this game. Interstate is good for this too, because the roads are designed in a way that you don't have a lot of sharp curves or anything that's, you can see where you're going, and you don't usually have sudden changes in direction or anything like that. But one thing I've noticed about this game is it really pushes you to try and notice features about trees that you maybe don't normally use as an identification characteristic, especially for folks who have spent a lot of time in their area with their trees. They can become really familiar with how to ID a tree in a certain way. Maybe it's the leaves, maybe it's the buds, maybe it's the bark. But you have these things. Maybe it's a combination of a couple of them, and it can become a habit to just ID trees with those characteristics. And sometimes those things aren't available. If you're driving and trying to ID trees at 60 miles an hour, you don't get a good look at buds. You might see the color, the general color of the buds. If you see a bunch of buds on a hardwood tree, all clustered together, you might get an idea. Especially in the spring, red maples stand out,
right, by
their red buds. So it can help you tap into some other things to get a deeper understanding of how things look, I think. And that's one good thing that I think you can get out of playing mile marker tree ID.
Nice.
And another thing is it can also show you different miles on the road have different forest makeup, and so there's places of greater diversity, and you're always, of course, trying to beat your personal best. So in a given mile, you get maybe like 6 species, and then you're trying to find a mile where you can ID
nice, yeah.
7 species.
That's cool.
And you might notice that, in these lower pockets with sort of some wetland, I'm seeing a lot of these types of trees, and I don't see them up on the high and dry ground. So that's another neat bit of understanding that you can get out of that knowing where the trees in your area like to grow, and again, knowing different areas where diversity is greater, because those are going to be the most fruitful for upping your number once you get good at IDing trees at speed.
Sounds pretty neat, Stefan. All right, so I think that's going to wrap us up for our episode. So, yeah. So anyway, end of the day, pay attention while you're driving, for safety reasons, but also for naturalist reasons.
Nice.
All right, Stefan. I got something to get off my chest.
Just let it out. Let it out.
All right, so a little while ago, I was driving to work, and I saw this thing on the side of the road.
A thing?
Yeah, it was a thing.
Okay, so hard to ID.
Yes. Hard to ID is what it was. And so, drove to work, saw this thing. I wasn't sure what it was. Didn't think much more of it after that. And on my way back home, Saw it again. Same thing. It's still a thing.
You can't be any more specific.
Then the next day, it was still there. Drove by. Just a ball of fur.
Okay.
Ball of nothing.
All right. Ball of nothing.
But then on my way back home from work, I was determined to figure out what it was. I had a little time. So I pull over. And this, of course, is some roadkill. By the way, we've had some requests for a roadkill episode. Hopefully this is satisfying for now. So it's some roadkill. Pull over to the thing. Get out of the car. Walk over. Ball of fur. Still have no idea what the hell this thing is.
It's still a thing. It's a furry thing.
I don't know if this has ever happened to you before. But, like... I mean, it was hard to tell. I mean, I knew it was a mammal because it had fur.
Okay.
And I think, like, there was blood. You know, I'm pretty sure the mammals have blood. And...
How do you know it wasn't an echidna?
I don't think this was an echidna, though.
Okay.
I don't know. I guess I just had to figure out what it was. I had to poke at it. So I got a good pokey stick. You know what I mean?
Yeah. A prodder.
Yeah. Good prodder. It's not going to break when I poke things. So I grab my pokey stick and I start poking it. And it was like super solid. Like rock solid.
Okay.
So, but then I got the pokey stick underneath it. And I pry it up. And like no more information gained. Like it was just like more fur. I'm like...
So this is like Franken roadkill?
I mean, I just have no idea what this is. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever come across indistinguishable roadkill before?
Okay, well, the short answer is yes. But haven't we all?
I suppose so. Have you ever pulled over for some roadkill to, like, check it out? And, like, and the people start to slow down and look at you as they're driving by?
Oh, yeah.
That's one of my favorites.
You get that. Like, what is there, a moose in there?
Yeah. And they're like looking up and down at the same time, like,
what's he looking at?
Like over the steering wheel, like, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
Like, is he really poking a dead thing with the stick?
Oh, is that all?
I mean,
they're drive-by naturalists, Matt.
Oh, well, all right. Well, I just needed to share that. Yeah. I still have no idea what the hell.
I understand. I wish I could shed some light on it, but
sometimes it happens. Could have been a rare echidna.